Renae is well known in Lewis and Clark circles. I happen to be a member of the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation Board, as well as the Humanities Nebraska Board. And she shows up all the time speaking around the state and even further on Lewis and Clark. She graduated from Stromberg High School, got her bachelor's degree from Utah State University, attended Gallaudet University, and is a qualified sign language interpreter. She has been very active in historical reenacting and worked as a museum educator for several years. She's actually traveled the Mormon Trail in 1997 and has followed the Lewis and Clark Trail as a graduate student in the summer of 2003. She's an active speaker on this topic, and please welcome Renae Hunt.
Well, thank you. I just want to get up on my soapbox first. I want to thank the Chautauqua and Norfolk for inviting me, and also for Humanities. I encourage you to write to your legislator, your state legislator, and say thank you. Thank you for supporting the arts. Because if it wasn't for their support, I wouldn't be able to be a part of the Speakers Bureau and go throughout this beautiful state that we have. So thank them for that support. So I'll step off my soapbox. Well, I need to get a little bit of a foundation. As he says, I am a retired teacher. Well, I'm not really retired, I'm just tired. And I don't like microphones, and so I'm assuming you can hear me in the back. Yeah, good. And also, being a teacher, you usually as a teacher, you stand next to the ones that are usually going to be the troublemakers. You're welcome. So if I'm standing close to you, that's the reason. But I need to get a little bit of a foundation. When you were in school, just a few years ago for some of us, who liked history? Ooh. I hated history. It was names and dates and places that you had to memorize and then regurgitated onto the test, and then you forgot about it, right? Yeah. Boring. I was 14 years old. My mother drugged me on a genealogical hunt through Iowa, Illinois, and into Ohio. We went to libraries, state buildings, county buildings. We were in dusty old basements looking at dirty books. Not those kind of books. Okay. Dusty, musty books. In one of them, we found a probate will for a great uncle of mine that left a pocket watch for his niece because she had taken care of him in his later life. All of a sudden, that man, who was just a name and a date to me, came alive to me. That's when I realized there's stories behind those names and dates and places that I had to memorize. Find out about those stories. So hopefully I'm going to be able to share with you some stories of things that you might not have thought about with the Lewis and Clark Trail. Well, let's start off. First president, and again, I'm a teacher, so I expect responses. First president of the United States. Washington, very good. Second, Adams, very good. I do this to kids, and they always say Lincoln. And the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. In reading biographies and things, to me, he was one of the greatest presidents that we had. Because when he took presidency, there was 5 million people in the United States. 2/3 of them lived within 50 miles of the ocean. Then there was this big mountain range, and that's where the other third lived. The West Coast was the Mississippi River. That was it. That's what it was when Jefferson took office. Well, the thing is, Jefferson had heard that the French and the Spanish were talking about some land issues. And he wanted in on it. Because what they were fighting for was the port of New Orleans. That's where big shipping, that's where cotton would go through and go over to Europe. Big, and he says, if we lose that, we're done. So he sent James Monroe. He says, here's $10 million, go to France and get it. Don't come back without the port of New Orleans. Well, he went over there, and fortunately, because of things going on in history, he ended up making a deal, but not just for the port of New Orleans. French said, nope, it's all or take none. And what it's going to take is the entire Louisiana territory. Anything that watershed goes into that area was considered the Louisiana territory. So he said, all or nothing, but we're going to charge you $15 million. This exceeded the U.S. budget by 3 times. But Monroe's going, he told me not to come back without it. So he made a deal. He came back $15 million for 820,000 acres. Works out to about 3 cents an acre. Well, not really, because we had to borrow money from England. They gave us 6% interest. In 1803, 6% interest. That's pretty major. That'd be great today, wouldn't it? Now, so now that acreage was 4 cents an acre. Good land deal? Any farmers? Is that a good land deal? Horrible. He had no idea what he had just purchased. No idea. So, Jefferson, he said, we've got to get out there. Got to get out there. He said, I've read things. He says, I've heard stories that there's blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians out there. He says, there's mountains of salt and of silver. We've got to get out there. So he had a secretary. When he took office, when Jefferson took office, he says, I need a secretary. And he had known Meriwether Lewis and said, come be my secretary. So Meriwether Lewis became his secretary. When Jefferson wanted this area explored, he thought of Meriwether Lewis. He was a military guy. He kept his rank even though he was working in the White House. And he says, I want you to go out there. Get some men and get out there and see if there's a waterway to the Pacific Ocean. Easy task, right? Easy task. Well, as he was trying to organize things, he knew he couldn't do it alone. So he had been in the service. He had had a companion that he had met while he was in the military of William Clark. Clark was 4 years older than Meriwether Lewis, but joined and said, come join me on this cruise that we're going to take, okay? And experimenting and exciting trip that we're going to take. And so that's how the two of them went. Now, there's a whole other lecture that we can do on their captainship and things like that, but we're not going to get into that. What we're going to get into is right outside of St. Louis is where they spent the first winter, the winter of 1803. And it was called Camp du Bois. And at this camp, that's where they got all of their soldiers, 27 military men that were not married, healthy, and unattached, like no family or anything. they didn't expect them to come back. Okay, so unattached, but healthy and strong. And remember, we have all of these that were on the other side of the mountain. They were frontiersmen. And that's where a lot of them came from. They had been out in the wilderness. They knew what to expect with the wilderness. Well, while at Camp Du Bois, they're loading up their keel boat with supplies and weaponry and things like that. And during that time, they also had, Meriwether-Lewis had, and made a purchase of a what? A dog. A Newfoundland. He paid $20. In equivalent money, that's $1,500 today. Okay? He never writes why, or why a dog to accompany them, but let's do a little bit of investigating. Why a Newfoundland? I used to have, my daughter trained Newfoundlands, had a Newfoundland dog, and what they are, in Canada, all of the fishermen, anything nautical, you had a Newfoundland. With the Newfoundland, they have 2 coats of hair. Right up next to the skin is a very short, tight weave of hair, of fur. The outer is a longer, but very oily. So if they're in the water, that water sheds off. And that thin, or that very small, thick coat next to the skin acts as a wetsuit, basically, for them. Their ears are close to their head, and they're rounded and flop down, protecting them so water doesn't get in. Their big flues, the thing that holds every water, and when they shake, drool flies all over the place, okay? What that is protecting them, again, from water, so that water doesn't get into their mouth. Their tail, very strong tail. It becomes their rudder when they are in the water. They don't doggy paddle. They do a modified breaststroke. The fishermen. Now, the thing is, this is a Newfoundland. They come from Newfoundland. It's an island. The main occupation is fishermen. Yeah. So the fisherman's going to go out, take his boat. He's going to take his dog with him. And he's going to get out in that water, and he has his net. He's going to throw that net out into the ocean. And it's got a rope that's hooked there to the boat. In a little bit, what he's going to do is he's going to tie that rope to the dog and throw the dog overboard. Now what that dog is going to do is swim around in a circle and draw that net out. Now he's going to come back to the boat with the net full of fish. Those flues I talked about, that's where the rope is. Those flues drop her down around that rope. Again, not water getting in there. I should have brought mine, I know. Unfortunately, I've lost it. Now, the thing is, so now we've got the fish at the boat. We're going to get the dog in. We're going to get that fish in. And now we're going to go back to land. Once we hit land, we're going to get our cart. We're going to take that fish and put it in the cart. And who's going to be in front of that cart? The Newfoundland. They can pull 3 to 4 times their weight. So they're strong in the water and off. They're also a very protective animal. Very protective breed. About a decade ago, I was here in Norfolk at the library doing a program just like this. It was for young children and families. I had a gentleman that was sitting over on the edge, and they had brought the entire family and had a 3-year-old. And she started fussing, like normal 3-year-olds, okay? Dad, to help protect so that everybody else could hear, grabbed her, not aggressively, but grabbed her and headed to the back of the room. I had to hold my dog because he's going, "You're not hurting that child." He was concerned that that child was going to get hurt because they're very protective. Didn't know this child from anything, but very protective. So, knowing those facts, why do we think Lewis purchased this dog? Purchased this dog for this adventure? They're going to be on water. They're loyal. He's going to be great on land. They're kind of a hunter. They're maybe flush out animals or whatever. So we don't know why. Meriwether Lewis never writes. But knowing about a Newfoundland, we can kind of make some guesses. Just a bit of trivia. The Titanic that went down, there was a Newfoundland on board there. His name was Rigel. Again, Newfoundlands, and he saved, and there's documentation, he saved over 70 people and drugged them to something that was floating. Okay? But then, we don't know anything after that. So, the dog. It was Lewis's dog. And the men that wrote journals referred to it as the captain's dog. The captain's dog did this. But as the time went on, 18 months, it became our dog. The dog. They all took ownership. If any of you have had an animal, I don't care what size, you become quite attached to them, right? Well, so not only was he good in the water and things like that, but he became a companion. He also, when he stood up on his hind legs, he was over 6.5 feet. Okay? He scared away a bear because he reared up and barked to scare the bear away. Again, that protective agency with a Newfoundland. Well, coming back, the last time we hear about him is when they're up in the mountains in Montana. The mosquitoes were horrific. Almost anybody that was writing journals said the mosquitoes are so bad. We can't sleep at night because the mosquitoes are horrible. And even some of them said, the mosquitoes are so bad, the dog cries. He has 2 coats of hair. Could you imagine how bad the mosquitoes had to be? That's the last time we hear about the Newfoundland. Seaman. If anybody read books that were published before 1960, they thought the dog's name was Sacagawea. Because Clark, who was the majority of the journal writing, was a horrible speller. And he spelled things incorrectly or abbreviated, and they thought it was. But then they found out because everything was named, not everything, a majority was named after people in the Corps. And so all of a sudden they came across a Seaman Creek, S-E-A-M-A-N. They're going, what? Well, Sacagawea, by looking at Clark's writing, was Seaman. So we have Seaman. That's the last we hear about him. But my grandma always said, no news is good news. If the men took pride in calling it our dog, if something bad would have happened, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have written about it. So in my hopeful estimation, he made it back to St. Louis. After that, of course, we know nothing, because he doesn't write any journals. But a life of a Newfoundland is only about 10 years. We don't know how old he was when Meriwether purchased them, so we don't know how long he did live. But we're hoping. Now my question is, and I'll repeat this question. He didn't get paid for anything, except maybe a few pets, a few scratches. Of course, he got fed just along with the men. But what was his value? Hope, protection. Oh, I like that hope one. Companionship. Was it worth the $20? Yeah. Yeah. So we have a four-legged creature that was one of our first members of the Corps. Well, he was owned by Meriwether Lewis. We have another member that was owned by William Clark, and that was York, the slave. Okay? Clark and Lewis were both 6 feet tall. Both of them wrote, the black man was taller than they were. Now, Clark, he kind of inherited him. York and Clark grew up together. And then Clark's father gave him York when Clark became an adult. So York became his body servant. Not bodyguard, body servant. Which meant he laid out his clothes. When he traveled, he would travel with Clark. He would do things for Clark. And so it became his body servant. Lived in the house wherever Clark would have lived. So we have Clark with York. And so he's going on this adventure. You're darn right he's going to take York with him. As a slave, they're not able to administer medicine. They are not allowed to know how to hunt. They are not allowed to operate a gun. So now we have this black man heading up the Missouri River with the Corps of Discovery. As much work as the men were doing to get that keelboat upstream, each man would have to eat 40 to 50 pounds of meat a day. A day. In order to keep up the muscle mass and needed that much protein. They're not going to take it with because there's no refrigeration, so what are they going to have to do every day? Hunt. We have this very able-bodied man. They're going to teach him how to hunt. He learns from one of the best shots. And they taught him how to hunt. And he became very proficient at it. So, he now has that freedom. We're back home. He wouldn't. Also, as we're going up the Missouri River, we're getting a little bit closer to where Sioux City is today, and a gentleman, one of the sergeants, gets ill. Captain Floyd. Sergeant Floyd, I should say. And he gives him some medicine to help him ease his pain and trying to get him better. Now, we lost Sergeant Floyd, of course, but what did he get to do that he couldn't do back home? Practice medicine. Also, later on, when they're in the Rocky Mountains, he administers and finds sulfa water for someone else and administers that. Oh, back in the States, blacks cannot vote. So York had all of these privileges out here. Also, they ran into many Indian tribes. They had never seen a black man. They would go up to him, lick their fingers, and rub to see if it would come off. And he would just laugh. He would part his hair and show them it was just as dark there, too. He was very strong. He's taller than 6 feet. He could stand flat-footed and do backflips. 2 of the young whips were fighting, and they wrote that York picked them up by the scruff of the neck, and they were both off of the ground. That's a lot of strength. The Indians called him Big Medicine. The leaders of many of the Indian tribes would bring their women to him, wanting that magic. You get my drift, okay? They wanted that energy. They wanted that huge power. And so he became fascinated. And he loved to be around the children in these Indian tribes. They didn't know each other's language, but he could act out a story. He would become a bear, or he would just, and the men wrote about that the children were just giddy and laughing at his stories. So he was a great asset. As they're traveling, they finally get to the east or the west coast, and they have to make a decision on if they want to make their camp closer to the ocean or a little bit further back, so that it's not quite so wet and damp. So they put it up to a vote to the men. He doesn't get to vote back in the United States. Does the black man get to decide between ocean or further away? Yes. First time in American history that a black man's opinion counted. Okay? So, we have them coming back. They get back to St. Louis, and all of the men, all of the soldiers, get acreage and extra pay. What does York get? Nothing. Not even his freedom. But no. Don't look at Clark through our 21st century eyes. 1806, when they got back. Still, black men cannot hunt, cannot use a gun, cannot administer medicine, can't even have business dealings with a white person. So keeping him as a slave was Clark's thinking, that's the best thing for you. Do you not understand? But for 2 years, almost 2 years, he had tasted freedom. And he wanted that freedom. After many years of debate and trying different things, Clark said, fine. And even helped him set up a dray wagon business. But again, a freed slave cannot have any dealings with another slave or white men. Is his business going to flourish? Yeah. No. So that's where York kind of disappears. There are different stories. I'm not going to tell you which one to believe. I'm going to give you a couple, and then you make a decision. One is that he went back to Clark and actually on the way contracted diphtheria and died. The other one is that he lost his business and went back up into the Rocky Mountains and lived out his years with the Crow people. Don't know. We do not know because, again, he could not write, and so we do not have any type of journals to verify what happened to York. But, again, my question I pose, was he valuable to the core? And why? Why was he valuable? Protection again? Yeah. He was a companion. The Indians. Wow, look at this thing coming down the river. But again, nothing for those efforts. Brings us to our third one. This one they meet up a little bit later. They meet up after being on the river for almost a year. And as they were at Fort Mandan up in North Dakota, they were talking with the Hidatsa and Mandan Indians, going, okay, we're going to have to go across mountains. And the Indians are going, you need horses to do that, because you're going to run out of river. So you're going to need horses to get over the mountains. You're going to need to deal with the Indians to get those horses. And Lewis and Clark go, who are we going to be dealing with? And they knew, what you're going to do is you're going to be dealing with Shoshone most likely. And they're going, we need somebody that can speak Shoshone. This is where a young lady comes into their life. This young lady was born in, get out my trusty map here, was born in the Idaho, Wyoming area. At about the age of 11, some Hidatsas and Mandan came over and raided while they were on a hunting party and stole some of the Shoshone women, drugged them back to North Dakota at 11 years old. Okay? Now, our young lady was a smart young lady. She grew up Shoshone, but she is now property of the Hidatsas. She learns their language quite quickly. She also endeared herself to them that they gave her a belt of blue beads. Blue beads are the most valuable because blue is very hard to come by in nature. And so a blue beaded belt was, just a wonderful gift. And the Hidatsas had given that to her. Well, at the age of 14, she becomes wife of a French-Canadian fur trader, Toussaint Charbonneau. Well, back to now Lewis and Clark, looking for a Shoshone speaker, Toussaint Charbonneau says, I've got the answer. I have a woman that speaks Shoshone. Take me and we'll get you there. He goes, okay, we'll take you. He said, I don't speak Shoshone. I speak Hidatsa, and I can translate to Shoshone. So you need to take both me and my woman. And Lewis and Clark going, I ain't taking no woman. No, we're not taking a woman. And he says, then you're not going to deal with the Shoshone because that's the only way. So they reconsidered, and they thought, okay, we're going to have to do that. They get introduced to this young, about 15, 16 years old, and they find out that she is expecting. Now this complicates even more, but they know they have to. February 11th of 1805, she has a son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. That next April, she packs up her baby on a willow board wrapped in skins, puts the baby on her back, and heads west with a permanent party of 32 men. Now, she is a bright young woman. She is very level-headed. Many books, statues call her a guide and an interpreter. Okay, let's get a few facts under our belt here. 11 years old when she was drugged from her home to North Dakota. No road signs, no Interstate 90. Is she going to find her way home? No. So is she a guide? No. She's not a guide. I love the statue where she's pointing and Lewis and Clark are over here. I keep saying I want to put a caption under there going, I'm going to go over there and do something personal. You stay here. She did not point the way. The only time she pointed the way is when they got close to Beaver Head Rock. Looks like a beaver. This is at Three Forks River, and this is where she was stolen from. She recognized the place. She did not guide them. She recognized it going, Beaver Head Rock. This is where I was stolen from. Shoshone, just that way. One time, she pointed the way. Okay? Not a guide. Interpreter, let's discuss that one. She only speaks Shoshone and Hidatsa. At one point, they deal with the Shoshone, we'll get there, but also they deal with the Nez Perce Indians. This is how the translation went. Meriwether spoke English to Pierre Crissot. Pierre spoke English and French. Pierre then spoke French to Toussaint Charbonneau. Charbonneau speaks French and Hidatsa. Then he speaks Hidatsa to Sacagawea. Then she speaks Shoshone to a slave that the Nez Perce had that speaks Shoshone and Nez Perce. That was just one way. However many have you played telephone? Could you imagine how this went? Back and forth through 5 interpreters. Yes, she interpreted. I will give her full credit for that. But she's just one in this cog. There were several interpreters. Okay? Let me back up. Her name. There's different ways to pronounce it, and I'm not going to correct you in however you want to. Some pronounce it Sacagawea. The North Dakotans pronounce it Sacagawea. Or then there's the true ones that's Sacagawea. I don't care how you pronounce it. But just a little bit of history. Again, she came from the Shoshones. Her husband called her Bird Woman. In the Shoshone language, there's nothing even close for Bird Woman close to Sacagawea. But in the Hidatsa language, Sacagawea is Bird Woman. You have to understand also Indian naming. They don't get a name until they hit puberty. She was 11 when she was stolen. My guess, she didn't have a Shoshone name yet. She is now hitting puberty when she was with the Hidatsas. So they named her Sacagawea. Again, however you pronounce it, that's great. So, we have woman with baby headed west. They get to Fort Clatsop. Again, they're going to vote. She's a woman. Does she get to vote? Yes. First woman that got to make her opinion known in a U.S. matter. Awesome. Okay? She also was able to, as I said, she was very bright. She was also very level-headed. At one point, one of the canoes, one of the pirogue, tipped. It had Clark's maps and the journals and all of their equipment, and it was floating down the river. And here, they're going down, and she started gathering. And her husband, who was probably in about his 30s, would almost drown her. He didn't know how to swim. But she was able to shuck him off and gathered all of these things. We wouldn't have a lot of the journals if it wasn't for her. So we came back. We dropped them off. We drop off Toussaint and we drop off Sacagawea at Fort Mandan. They settle up with Toussaint and pay him. And Sacagawea received nothing. She was just as valuable as all of the others. The thing is, going down that river, we have mama and baby. We have a big black man, big dog, going down the river. Indians are seeing this. They're thinking, war party? No. No war party is going to take a woman, and especially a woman with a baby. What this is a floating circus. It was peace. It was better than any white flag that you could have imagined. So, as a guide, a little bit. As an interpreter, a little bit. But what she was a flag of peace to those Indians of what she represented. I can't imagine the hardship that she went through. Now, her fate, again, there's different stories. After she had her baby, again, they left in April. Before they hit Idaho, when they were in Montana, she became violently ill. York found a spring, a sulfur spring, and brought this fresh water back and administered to her. She got better. I have a doctor friend who has studied Floyd's and has studied that, and he has come to find thinking that she got sick from post maternal sickness, that she had, she was losing weight and she was not feeling, and fever, and even today we treat it with sulfa. They were curing her and didn't even know it. So we have, and so when she came back, they left, but then a few years later, then Toussaint brings down the baby to Clark, because Clark promised, I will educate this baby. They called him Pomp or Pompey. This little child left, he was 3 months old when he left, 18 months when they returned. Could you imagine, in Fort Clatsop, he was learning to walk. When you have watched your children, your nieces, nephews, your grandchildren learn to walk, what comes to your face? A smile, a comfort. Could you imagine these scruffy, dirty, smelly military men with a year-old toddling and learning to walk? Did he have value? Boy, he had value. He certainly did. So we have mama and baby, but again, they received nothing. Pomp did go down to St. Louis. Clark did not necessarily adopt, but took them as guardians. And he did not live with Clark because Clark's wife, Julia, would not allow it, but lived in the house next door. Okay? He educated him. And Jean-Baptiste actually went to Germany, spent some time with the Prince of Germany. Pomp came back to the United States and was a true guide. He guided the Mormon battalion from New Mexico to California. He was a fur trader. He searched for gold. He was on his way to Montana in 1866 to search for gold there when he got sick and died en route. And he died at the age of 61 in Oregon. So, I've introduced you to 4 members of the Corps of Discovery. None of them were paid a dime. But were they valued? Were they worth them going on this trip? Ladies and gentlemen, you may think, wow, I don't get credit for that. Does that mean we don't do it? Does that mean that we, stop being kind to our neighbors and kind to our fellow citizen? You don't know what your value is. And you may not be told, but everyone sitting in here, you have value, just like these 4 members. Thank you. Questions, comments, queries?
Did Sacagawea also find her brother?
Yes. When they were with the Shoshones, the clock right there bugs me. When they were with the Shoshones, they were, Clark and Lewis were trying to deal with the leader. And so they said, okay, we've got to have the interpreter go get Sacagawea. So here she comes into the group tent. She comes in, she runs to the leader of, his name was Gallaudet, throws a blanket over the leader of the Indians. And Clark and Lewis are going, she's gone mad. Gallaudet was her brother. It was a family reunion. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, it was a family reunion. Did that make it easy getting horses? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, she was that.
We've been out to Fort Clatsop, where I always say that. Camp Disappointment, is that all the same thing?
No. Fort Clatsop is here. Fort Disappointment is in Idaho.
Okay, got it.
I've camped at Fort Disappointment. It's a disappointment.
That's a good name.
Yep. There's supposed to be a river there. It ain't there. Disappointment. Very much so. Very much so. Any other questions, comments, queries?
I have a personal question. What
Yes.
grade did you teach?
I was with the Deaf Education Program, and so I taught everything from preschool up to 8th grade. I didn't do high school because high schoolers they're aliens. Yeah, from preschool to 8th graders, yeah. I worked with the deaf kids.
You're very good. We're very actually.
Thank you. As my family says, if we tied Mom's hands, she wouldn't be able to talk.
That's the teacher.
That's the teacher. And I'm very soft-spoken too.
Thank you all for attending today.